The Duke of Blackthorne had never trusted a woman in his life, until he married one he didn't know. 3 months later, he threw her out based on a lie. Now she's back, standing in his study with evidence that could destroy him, and he's realizing the worst mistake wasn't believing the fraud. It was underestimating her. If you want to see how a woman with nothing but her wits takes down an empire of deception, stick with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Adrian Blackthorne learned to despise marriage when he was 9 years old. That was the year his father, the 7th Duke of Blackthorne, drove the family into ruin, chasing after a woman who smiled with her mouth but calculated with her eyes. Adrian remembered the shouting, the locked doors, his mother's face, pale and silent, as creditors dismantled their London townhouse piece by piece. He remembered his father's slurred apologies, the stink of whiskey, and the way grown men looked at a duchess when she had nothing left to sell but the rings on her fingers. By the time his father died, falling drunk down a flight of stairs in a mistress's rented room, Adrian had learned the lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Love was a con. Marriage was the trap it came in. Now, at 32, he was the 8th Duke of Blackthorne, and he intended to die the last. "You're being unreasonable." His grandmother's voice cut through the silence of the study like a blade through silk. Lady Constance Blackthorne sat across from him, her spine rigid, her silver hair swept into a style that belonged to another century. She looked like a relic. She argued like a general. "I'm being practical," Adrian said without looking up from the estate ledger in front of him. "Marriage is a distraction I don't need. Marriage is a duty you're ignoring. The estate doesn't require me to produce an heir to function. The estate requires stability," Constance snapped. "And you, skulking around like some gothic villain, refusing every introduction, every dance, every remotely suitable girl, it's making people talk. Let them. They're saying you're cold. I am. They're saying you're broken." Adrian's pen paused. He set it down slowly, carefully, and finally looked at her. Constance didn't flinch. She never did. "They're half right," he said quietly. For a moment, something like sadness flickered across his grandmother's face. Then it was gone, replaced by the steel that had held the Blackthorne name together when his father tried to pawn it. "You're not your father," she said. "No, I learned from his mistakes." "You learned the wrong lesson." Constance stood, smoothing her skirts. "Your father was weak because he let passion make him stupid. You're becoming weak because you let fear make you alone." She left before he could answer. Adrian sat in the silence, staring at the numbers in front of him. Income, expenses, yields per acre, wages for 63 staff members, payments to 14 tenant families, repairs on the north wing that were 3 years overdue because his father had spent the money on a necklace for a woman whose name Adrian couldn't even remember. He'd clawed it all back. Every penny, every inch of reputation, and he'd done it alone. His grandmother could call it fear if she wanted. He called it control. He was still staring at the ledger when the knock came. "Enter," he said. The door opened. Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper, stepped inside. She was a solid woman in her 50s, competent and unflappable, the kind of person who ran a household the way generals ran campaigns. "Your Grace," she said, "there's a matter that requires your attention." Adrian closed the ledger. "What kind of matter?" "The discrepancy in the grain storage records. You asked to be informed if the numbers didn't reconcile." He had. 2 weeks ago, he'd noticed an inconsistency. Small, easy to miss, but present. The kind of thing that could mean clerical error or something worse. "And?" "Miss Whitmore sorted it." Adrian frowned. "Who?" Mrs. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Miss Clara Whitmore. She's been managing the household accounts for the past 18 months. "I don't know that name." "No, Your Grace, you wouldn't." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying the housekeeper. "Explain." Mrs. Brennan folded her hands in front of her. "When your father passed and you took over the estate, there was chaos, staff leaving, creditors circling. You were in London most of the time, handling the legal matters. Someone needed to keep the house running. That was your job." "It was. But I'm not a mathematician, Your Grace, and I'm not young enough to work 18-hour days anymore." She paused. "Miss Whitmore came to us through the village rector. She'd been tutoring his children, keeping his books. When I needed help, He recommended her. And you hired her without consulting me. You were occupied. It wasn't an apology. It was a fact. Adrian considered dismissing her on the spot. He considered a lot of things in the 3 seconds of silence that followed. But Mrs. Brennan had been with the family since before he was born. She'd stayed when others fled. And if she said someone was necessary, she wasn't lying. "What does she do?" he asked. "Everything you don't see," Mrs. Brennan said simply. "She manages the household expenses, reconciles the accounts, coordinates with the tenants on supply deliveries, handles staff wages, organizes the seasonal inventories. When the North Pasture drainage failed last spring, she's the one who arranged the repair crew and kept it under budget." Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger. Something worse. Ignorance. "Why," he said slowly, "am I only hearing about this now? Because you never asked." The truth of it was blunt and ugly. He'd been so focused on the public face of the estate, the land, the legacy, the title, that he'd stopped paying attention to the mechanics that kept it alive. "I want to meet her," he said. Mrs. Brennan hesitated. "Is there a problem?" Adrian asked. "Miss Whitmore isn't accustomed to audiences with the family, Your Grace. She works in my house. I'm not asking her to curtsy. I'm asking her to explain how she's been managing my money without my knowledge." "Very well," Mrs. Brennan inclined her head. "I'll inform her." She left. Adrian sat alone in the study, feeling the edges of control start to fray. Clara Whitmore had no illusions about her place in the world. She was 26, unmarried, and possessed of a face that men's eyes slid past without catching. She had brown hair that refused to curl, a figure too slim to be fashionable, and a mind too sharp to be charming. She'd learned young that intelligence in a woman was tolerated only when it was invisible. So she made herself invisible. She kept the Blackthorne household accounts in a small office tucked behind the kitchens, a room that had once been a pantry. It smelled faintly of dried herbs and old wood. She liked it. No one bothered her there. She was halfway through reconciling the quartermaster's supply requests when Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway. "He wants to see you," the housekeeper said without preamble. Clara looked up from the ledger. "Who?" "The Duke." Her pen stopped moving. "Why?" Clara asked. "Because I told him you exist." Clara set the pen down carefully. "You didn't think to warn me first?" "I'm warning you now." Mrs. Brennan's face softened just slightly. "You haven't done anything wrong, Clara. He's just curious." Curious. The word felt like a trap. Clara had worked in the Blackthorne estate for 18 months, and in all that time she'd seen the Duke exactly 4 times. Always from a distance, always in passing. A tall figure in dark coats moving through the halls like a storm that never quite broke. She knew what the staff said about him. Cold, controlled, impossible to please. She also knew what the account book said about him. He'd pulled the estate back from the edge of collapse through sheer force of will and a refusal to spend a single pound he couldn't justify. She respected that. She wasn't sure she wanted to meet the man behind it. "When?" she asked. "Now." Clara stood. She smoothed her skirt, plain gray wool, practical, and followed Mrs. Brennan through the warren of service corridors that connected the hidden parts of the house to the grand ones. They stopped outside the study. Mrs. Brennan knocked once, then opened the door. "Miss Whitmore, Your Grace," she said. Clara stepped inside. The study was exactly what she'd imagined. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with books that looked red. A fire burned low in the grate, and behind the desk, silhouetted against the window, was the Duke. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just looked at her. Clara had been looked at before, by men who wanted something, by women who saw competition, by children who needed help. This was different. The Duke looked at her the way she looked at numbers, searching for the pattern, the flaw, the thing that didn't add up. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was low, clipped. "Mrs. Brennan tells me you've been managing my household finances." "Yes, Your Grace. For 18 months. Yes. And I'm only learning of this now." Clara met his eyes. They were gray, she noticed. The color of winter. "You've been occupied with other matters." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or annoyance. Do you know who I am? He asked. You're the Duke of Blackthorne. Do you know what that means? It means you own this estate and everyone on it. It means your word is law. It means I'm standing here because you summoned me and I'll leave when you dismiss me. She paused. It also means you're responsible for 600 acres, 72 people, and a reputation you rebuilt from nothing. So yes, Your Grace, I know who you are. Silence. The Duke leaned back in his chair, still watching her. Mrs. Brennan says you're competent, he said. Mrs. Brennan is kind. She's not known for kindness. She's known for accuracy. He picked up a sheet of paper from his desk. This is the discrepancy report you filed last week, the grain storage numbers. Yes. You found a clerical error. No, Your Grace, I found theft. His eyes sharpened. Explain. Clara stepped closer to the desk, her hands folded in front of her. The quartermaster has been skimming 2% off every grain delivery for the past 9 months. Small amounts. Easy to miss if you're only checking totals, but over time it adds up. How much? 400 pounds of grain, approximately 60 pounds in value. And you're certain? I have the invoices cross-referenced with the storage logs. The numbers don't lie. Adrian set the paper down. Who else knows about this? Only Mrs. Brennan. I wanted to confirm before I brought it to anyone's attention. You should have brought it to mine. I wasn't sure you'd listen. The bluntness of it seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at her for a long moment, and Clara wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Then, unexpectedly, he almost smiled. You're right, he said. I probably wouldn't have. He stood and Clara realized for the first time just how tall he was. Tall and lean, with the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. I want a full audit of the household accounts, he said. Everything, wages, supplies, maintenance costs. If there's one thief, there are others. That will take time, Clara said. How much? 2 weeks, maybe 3, if the records are incomplete. You'll have whatever access you need. Mrs. Brennan will inform the staff. He paused. You'll report directly to me. Clara blinked. Your Grace, if someone's stealing from this estate, I want to know who and how much. You're the one who found it. You'll finish it. It wasn't a request. Understood, Clara said quietly. Good. He returned to his seat, already reaching for another document. That's all. Clara turned to leave. Miss Whitmore. She stopped, glancing back. The Duke was watching her again, his expression unreadable. Why didn't you tell me yourself? He asked. About the theft. Clara considered lying, considered deflecting. Then she decided the truth was simpler. Because men in power don't like being told they've missed something, she said. Especially by women they don't know exist. She left before he could respond. The audit took 17 days. Clara worked through the records like a surgeon through a wound, cutting away the rot to see what was healthy underneath. She started with the grain theft and followed the thread. The quartermaster had been selling the stolen supply to a merchant in the village and pocketing the difference. When confronted, he confessed in under 10 minutes. The Duke dismissed him the same day. But the quartermaster wasn't the only problem. Clara found a maid who'd been charging the estate for candles she never purchased. A groundskeeper who'd been billing for tools he'd sold secondhand. A contract with a textile supplier that was charging twice the market rate because the previous estate manager had been taking a cut. Each discovery she brought to the Duke. Each time he listened without interruption, asked 2 or 3 sharp questions, and made a decision on the spot. She'd expected arrogance, maybe cruelty. What she found instead was precision. Adrian Blackthorne didn't waste time. He didn't posture. He looked at the facts, weighed the options, and acted. If someone could be salvaged, he gave them a chance. If they couldn't, he cut them loose without hesitation. It was the coldest kind of fairness, but it was fair. By the 3rd week, Claire had started to understand why the estate had survived. It wasn't luck. It wasn't legacy. It was him. You're sure about this one? Adrian asked, holding up the report she'd just handed him. They were in the study again. It had become routine. Clara presenting her findings, the Duke reviewing them, decisions made before the fire burned low. Completely, Clara said. The textile contract is a fraud. You're paying for quality you're not receiving. And the supplier? A man named Caro. He has a reputation in London for this kind of scheme. Overcharge estates, bribe the managers, and move on before anyone notices. Adrian's jaw tightened. How much have we lost? In the past 2 years, close to £800. Christ. He set the report down, pressing his fingers to his temple. My father signed this contract. I know. Of course he did. Adrian's voice was bitter. He probably didn't even read it. Too busy spending money he didn't have on people who didn't care. Clara said nothing. She'd learned over the past 2 weeks that the Duke didn't want sympathy. He wanted solutions. Cancel it, Adrian said. Find a new supplier, someone vetted. I already have. He looked up, surprised. You what? I anticipated your approval. I contacted 3 textile suppliers with verified reputations. I have quotes from all of them. The best one is 40% cheaper than Caro and has a faster delivery time. Adrian stared at her. You anticipated my approval, he repeated slowly. You've approved every recommendation I've made so far, Clara said. It seemed inefficient to wait. And if I'd said no, then I would have apologized and moved more carefully next time. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. Then Adrian laughed. It was a short, rough sound, like he'd forgotten how. But it was real. You're terrifying, he said. Clara allowed herself a small smile. Thank you, Your Grace. That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one. He shook his head, still almost smiling. Fine. Approve the new supplier. And Miss Whitmore? Yes? Stop calling me Your Grace every other sentence. It's exhausting. Clara hesitated. What should I call you? Blackthorne is fine. Or Adrian, if we're alone. It felt like a shift, a small one, but deliberate. All right, Clara said. Adrian. The name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar, too personal, but he'd offered it, and she wasn't going to refuse. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Clara was in her small office, updating the household wage records, when Mrs. Brennan appeared with a cream-colored envelope in her hand. This came for you, the housekeeper said, setting it on Clara's desk. Clara frowned. For me? Apparently. She opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation to the Blackthorne Spring Masquerade, an annual event held at the estate for the local gentry and titled families. It was one of the few social obligations the Duke hadn't canceled after taking over. Clara had heard the staff talk about it, the decorations, the music, the elaborate masks and gowns. She'd never imagined she'd be invited. There's a note, Mrs. Brennan said, nodding to a second slip of paper inside the envelope. Clara unfolded it. The handwriting was sharp, efficient. You've spent 2 weeks cleaning up messes made by people who thought they were smarter than they were. You should see what that looks like from the other side. Attend. Considerate research. A.B. Clara read it twice. He wants me at the ball, she said aloud. So it seems. Why? Mrs. Brennan's expression was unreadable. Perhaps you should ask him. But Clara didn't ask, because part of her already knew. Adrian Blackthorne was testing her. Not her competence. He'd already seen that. He was testing whether she could move between worlds. Whether the woman who reconciled ledgers in a pantry office could hold her own in a ballroom full of people who'd spent their lives learning to smile while they schemed. She could refuse. Or she could prove him right. Clara looked down at the invitation, then at Mrs. Brennan. I'll need a dress, she said. The housekeeper's mouth curved into something that might have been approval. Leave that to me, she said. The night of the masquerade, Clara stood in front of the mirror in her small room and barely recognized herself. The dress was deep blue, simple in cut but elegant. Mrs. Brennan had pulled it from storage, one of the late Duchess's gowns, altered to fit. The mask was black silk, delicate and unadorned. Clara didn't look invisible anymore. She looked like someone who belonged. The thought was terrifying. The ballroom was already crowded when she arrived. Chandeliers blazed overhead, reflecting off polished floors and glittering masks. Music swelled from the corner where a small orchestra played. Voices rose and fell in a rhythm Clara didn't know the steps to. She stayed near the edge of the room, watching. Not dancing? The voice came from beside her. Clara turned. Adrian stood there, dressed in black, a silver mask covering the upper half of his face. But she knew him instantly. The set of his shoulders, the way he held himself like he was braced for attack. I don't know how, Clara admitted. Neither do half the people out there. They're just better at pretending. She almost smiled. Is that what you do? Every day. They stood together in silence, watching the crowd. You came, Adrian said after a moment. You invited me. I didn't think you would. Why not? He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Because you don't need this world. Most of the people here do. They need the titles, the status, the alliances. You don't. What do I need? Clara asked. Adrian considered the question seriously. A better employer, he said finally. Someone who noticed you sooner. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever heard from him. I don't need that, Clara said quietly. I need to be useful. I need work that matters. You gave me that. He looked at her then, fully, and Clara felt the weight of it. You terrify half my staff, you know, Adrian said. Good. And the other half worship you. Even better. This time he did smile. A real one. Dance with me, he said. Clara's heart jumped. I told you, I don't know how. I'll lead, you follow. It's not complicated. He offered his hand. Clara looked at it, looked at him. Then she took it. They moved on to the floor and Adrian was right. It wasn't complicated. He led with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything else, and Clara followed, her hand in his, the world narrowing to the space between them. Why did you really invite me? Clara asked as they turned. Because I wanted to see if I was right. About what? That you're wasted in that pantry office. Clara's breath caught. I'm not wasted. I'm doing exactly what I'm good at. You could do more. Like what? Adrian met her eyes through the mask. Like standing beside me instead of behind me. The music swelled, the room spun, and Clara realized, with a jolt that felt like falling, that the Duke of Blackthorne wasn't just testing her. He was offering her something. She just didn't know what yet. The ball ended near midnight. Clara slipped away before the final dance, retreating to the quiet of the service halls. She needed air. She needed to think. But when she reached her office, Adrian was already there. He'd removed his mask. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the dark grounds. You left early, he said without turning. So did you. I hate these things. Then why hold them? Obligation. He turned to face her. My grandmother insists. The tenants expect it. It's one night a year where I pretend to be the kind of Duke people want me to be. And what kind is that? Charming, accessible, human. Clara set her mask on the desk. You're human. That's generous. It's observable. Adrian crossed the room, stopping a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. I need to tell you something, he said. Clara waited. My grandmother is pressuring me to marry, Adrian said bluntly. She says the estate needs stability, an heir, the usual arguments. And you don't want to. I don't trust it. Marriage, love, any of it. His voice was flat, factual. I watched my father destroy everything chasing it. I won't make the same mistake. Then don't, Clara said simply. It's not that simple. If I don't marry, the title dies with me. The estate gets absorbed by some distant cousin who'll sell it off piece by piece. He paused. Everyone who depends on this place loses. Clara saw where this was going. She felt it like a hand closing around her chest. So you need a wife, she said slowly. I need a partner, Adrian corrected. Someone I can trust. Someone who sees this place the way I do. Someone who won't burn it down the moment I turn my back. He took a breath. I'm asking you, Clara. The room went silent. You want to marry me, Clara said. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I want to offer you a position, Adrian said. Duchess of Blackthorne. Full authority over the household, the finances, the staff, a salary, independence, protection. He met her eyes. No love, no pretense. Just partnership. You do what you've been doing, but with the title and power to do it properly. Clara's mind spun. It was insane. It was also the most logical thing she'd ever heard. "What do you get out of this?" she asked. "Stability. An heir, eventually, if we choose. And someone I don't have to lie to." "Why me?" "Because you're the only person in this house I trust," Adrian said simply, "and because I think you're the only one smart enough to survive it." Clara looked at him. This cold, careful man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten there was a world outside them. She should say no. She should walk away. But Clara Whitmore had spent her entire life being invisible, doing work no one saw, making herself useful to people who'd forget her name the moment she left. Adrian was offering her something different. He was offering her power. "I'll think about it," she said. Adrian nodded, unsurprised. "Take your time," he said, "but not too long. My grandmother is persistent." He left. Clara stood alone in the small office, staring at the ledgers on her desk, the numbers that had been her world for 18 months, and she wondered if she was brave enough to rewrite them. She gave him her answer 3 days later. "Yes." Adrian looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face before he controlled it. "You're certain?" he asked. "No," Clara said honestly, "but I'm certain that I'm tired of being invisible, and I'm certain that you need me." "I do." "Then let's do this properly." She stepped forward. "Rules, boundaries, expectations. If we're going to build a partnership, we do it with our eyes open." Adrian stood. He extended his hand. "Agreed." Clara took it. They shook. And the deal was made. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them pretended it was anything more than what it was. A contract, a strategy, a marriage that had nothing to do with love. What they didn't realize, what neither of them could see yet, was that contracts could be rewritten, and strategies had a way of failing when the heart got involved. The announcement appeared in the London papers exactly 1 week after Clara accepted Adrian's proposal. "The Duke of Blackthorne is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Clara Whitmore of—" The sentence trailed off into vague geography because Clara came from nowhere that mattered. No family estate, no connections, just a village rector's recommendation and 18 months of invisible work. Society reacted the way Adrian predicted, with confusion, then suspicion, then barely concealed mockery. "She's nobody," Lady Pemberton said, loud enough to be heard across the drawing room during an afternoon tea Clara was obligated to attend. "Absolutely nobody." Clara sat in the corner, tea untouched, watching the older woman hold court. Lady Pemberton had 3 eligible daughters and a grudge against any woman who landed a duke without the proper breeding to deserve it. "I hear she kept his books," another woman whispered, leaning close. "Like a clerk. How mercenary. How desperate." Clara's hands remained steady on her teacup. She'd expected this. Adrian had warned her, but knowing something was coming didn't make it easier to sit through. Across the room, Constance Blackthorne, Adrian's grandmother, watched with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. When the whispers grew too loud, she set down her own cup with a sharp clink that silenced the room. "Miss Whitmore," Constance said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "I understand you managed the Blackthorne household finances for quite some time before my grandson noticed you existed." It wasn't a question. It was a test. Clara met the old woman's eyes. 18 months, Lady Constance. "And in that time you uncovered significant theft." "Yes." "How significant?" "Nearly £2,000 over a 3-year period once we finished the full audit." The room went silent. £2,000 was more than most of these women spent on gowns in a year. Constance's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "And my grandson trusted you to handle this quietly." "He trusted me to handle it correctly," Clara said. Quietly was a consequence, not the goal. For a long moment, Constance simply stared at her. Then she smiled. It was a thin, sharp thing. "I believe I'm going to like you, Miss Whitmore," she said. The women around them looked like they'd swallowed glass. Clara allowed herself the smallest nod. "I hope so, Lady Constance." The tea ended shortly after. As Clara stood to leave, Constance caught her arm. "Walk with me," the older woman said. It wasn't a request. They walked through the gardens behind the Blackthorne London house, a narrow strip of green wedged between stone walls and wrought iron. Constance moved slowly, but with purpose. "You're not what I expected," Constance said after a long silence. I'm rarely what anyone expects. Adrian told me you accepted his proposal knowing exactly what it was. A business arrangement. Yes. Do you love him? The bluntness of it would have startled a different woman. Clara just shook her head. No. Does he love you? No. Good. Constance stopped walking, turning to face Clara fully. Love makes people stupid. I watched it destroy Adrian's father. I won't watch it destroy Adrian. Then we agree, Clara said. Do we? Constance's gaze was sharp. Because I've seen women enter marriages like this before. They tell themselves it's practical, strategic. Then 6 months later, they're weeping because their husband doesn't look at them the way heroines get looked at in novels. I don't read novels, Clara said. You will. Everyone does eventually when they're lonely enough. Clara felt the words land somewhere cold in her chest. I'm not lonely. I'm busy. You can be both. Constance resumed walking. Adrian is my grandson, and I love him. But he's also a man who learned to survive by not feeling. If you're expecting that to change because you're sharing his name and his bed... I'm not sharing his bed, Constance stopped again. What? It's not that kind of arrangement, Clara said evenly. We have separate rooms, separate lives, mostly. The marriage is legal and public, the rest is negotiable. For the first time, Constance looked genuinely surprised. He told you that? We agreed to it. And you believe him? I believe we both want the same thing, Clara said. Control. Stability. A partnership that doesn't collapse the moment emotions get involved. Constance studied her for a long time. You're either the smartest woman I've ever met, she said finally, or the most naive. Time will tell, Clara said. Constance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Yes, it will. They returned to the house in silence. As Clara reached the door, Constance spoke once more. One more thing, Miss Whitmore. Clara turned. If you hurt him, Constance said quietly, I will destroy you, quietly, completely, in ways you won't see coming until it's too late. Clara held her gaze. If he hurts me, Lady Constance, I'll do the same to him, and I'll be efficient about it. Constance smiled again, a real one this time. Yes, she said, I'm definitely going to like you. The wedding was small. Adrian insisted on it. They married in the estate chapel with fewer than 20 people present. Constance, Mrs. Brennan, a handful of key staff, and a vicar who looked mildly confused by the whole affair. Clara wore a simple ivory gown. Adrian wore black. They stood in front of the altar like two people signing a contract, which, in a sense, they were. Do you, Adrian Nicholas Blackthorne, take this woman? I do, Adrian said before the vicar finished. The man blinked. I wasn't quite... I know, I do. Clara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. When her turn came, she was equally brief. I do. The vicar looked between them, sighed, and pronounced them married. Adrian kissed her. Once. A brief press of lips that was more formality than affection. Then it was done. The Duchess of Blackthorne walked out of the chapel on her husband's arm, and Clara Whitmore ceased to exist. The first month of marriage was stranger than Clara anticipated. She moved into the Duchess's suite, a sprawling set of rooms on the second floor that hadn't been used since Adrian's mother died. The furniture was old but well made. The walls were pale blue. The windows overlooked the east gardens. It felt like living in a museum. Adrian's rooms were across the hall. They shared a connecting door that stayed locked. In public, they were polite, courteous. He called her Clara now instead of Miss Whitmore. She called him Adrian instead of Your Grace. They took meals together when he wasn't traveling to London or inspecting the far edges of the estate. In private, they were something else. Not quite friends, not quite strangers. They worked. Clara took over full management of the household, and for the first time she had the authority to make real changes. She renegotiated contracts, adjusted staff wages to something livable, implemented a new rotation system that gave the overworked maids actual days off. The estate ran smoother. The staff stopped looking at her like she was temporary. And Adrian noticed. You changed the linen supplier, he said one evening over dinner. Clara looked up from her plate. Yes. The old one was overcharging. By how much? 30%. Adrian set down his fork. And you didn't ask me first. You told me I had full authority over household expenses under £500. The contract was $420. So you acted? Yes. He picked up his wine glass, watching her over the rim. You're enjoying this. Enjoying what? Having power. Clara considered lying, then decided it wasn't worth it. Yes, I am. Good. Adrian took a sip. You should. It was the closest thing to approval she'd gotten from him in weeks. But that night, alone in her too-large bedroom, Clara stood at the window and wondered if Constance had been right. You can be busy and lonely both. She pushed the thought away and went back to work. The problem started with Edwin Hale. He arrived on a Thursday morning in early summer, carrying a letter of introduction from the bank that held the estate's primary accounts. Hale was tall, polished, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your Grace, he said, bowing to Adrian in the study. It's an honor. Mr. Hale, Adrian gestured to a chair. You said the bank requested an audit. A standard review, Hale said smoothly. Given the recent changes in estate management, they want to ensure everything is in order, purely routine. Clara, sitting in the corner with a ledger, felt something cold settle in her stomach. What changes? Adrian asked. Your marriage, primarily, and the restructuring of household finances. Hale glanced at Clara with a smile that looked friendly and felt like a threat. No offense intended, Your Grace, but when someone new takes control of significant assets, the bank simply wants assurance. My wife isn't someone new, Adrian said, his voice cooling. She's been managing these accounts longer than you've been at the bank. Of course. I meant no disrespect. Hale opened his case, pulling out papers. Still, the review is required. I'll need access to all financial records for the past 2 years. Household expenses, staff wages, supplier contracts, tenant payments, everything. Adrian looked at Clara. She nodded once. I'll have Mrs. Brennan prepare a workspace for you. Excellent, Hale said. This should only take a week or two. It took 3. Hale worked in the estate's secondary office, a room near the library that was rarely used. He requested records in batches, reviewed them methodically, and asked questions that felt pointed. The grain supplier contract was canceled last year, he said to Clara one afternoon. Why? The previous supplier was overcharging and delivering substandard product, Clara said. We found a better option. And the decision was yours? It was mine to recommend. The Duke approved it, but you initiated it. Yes. Hale made a note. I see. Clara watched him write, her instincts prickling. Is there a problem, Mr. Hale? Not at all, Your Grace. Just ensuring everything is properly documented. But his smile said otherwise. That night, Clara found Adrian in the library, staring at a book he wasn't reading. Hale's looking for something, she said. Adrian glanced up. I know. Do you know what? A mistake. An inconsistency. Anything he can use to justify a deeper investigation. Adrian closed the book. The bank doesn't trust us. Why not? Because I pulled the estate out of debt without their help. Because I refinanced with a competitor. Because they're losing money on us. He stood, pacing. They want leverage. And Hale is here to find it. Yes. Clara crossed her arms. Then we make sure he doesn't. We? I manage those accounts, Adrian. If there's a problem, it's my problem too. For a moment he just looked at her, then he nodded. All right, he said. Then we go through everything, line by line, before he does. They worked for 3 nights straight. Clara pulled every ledger, every receipt, every contract she'd touched in the past 18 months. Adrian cross-referenced them against the bank statements. They checked totals. They verified signatures. They looked for anything that could be twisted into evidence of fraud or mismanagement. They found nothing. We're clean, Adrian said on the 3rd night, leaning back in his chair. There's nothing here. Then why do I still feel like we're missing something? Clara asked. Because Hale's still here. He was. And on the morning of his 14th day at the estate, he requested a meeting with Adrian. Clara wasn't invited. She found out later what happened from Mrs. Brennan, who heard it from the footman who'd served tea. Hale had presented Adrian with a report, a detailed professional document outlining irregularities in the household accounts, payments that didn't match invoices, contracts signed without proper authorization, withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for. All of them traced back to Clara. "It's fabricated," Clara said when Adrian showed her the report that evening. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still. "Every single page. I didn't authorize these payments. I didn't sign these contracts." "I know." "Do you?" She looked at him. "Because Hale's report makes it look like I've been embezzling for months." "I know you haven't." "How?" "Because I've been reviewing the same accounts he has," Adrian said flatly. "And because if you were stealing from me, you'd be smart enough not to leave a trail this obvious." Despite everything, Clara almost laughed. "That's your defense? I'm too competent to be a thief?" "Yes." She shook her head. "Hale's going to take this to the bank. They'll freeze the accounts, launch a formal investigation. Even if we prove it's false, the damage will be done." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Adrian set the report down, his jaw tight. "We fight." But fighting meant lawyers, depositions, weeks, maybe months, of scrutiny while the estate's reputation crumbled. Clara looked at the fabricated evidence in front of her, the forged signatures, the altered numbers, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not fear, rage. "He's setting me up," she said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're an easy target," Adrian said. "A woman with no family, no title, who rose too fast. The bank doesn't want to go after me directly, so they go after you, and through you, they get leverage over me. And you're just going to let them?" "No." Adrian's eyes were cold. "But I need proof before I move. Real proof. Not just our word against his." "Then get it." How, Clara thought. Then she stood. "Give me 2 days." "Clara." "2 days, Adrian, that's all I need." He studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod. 2 days, he agreed. Clara spent the first day going through Hale's audit notes, the ones he'd requested from the staff, the records he'd reviewed, the questions he'd asked. She made a list, cross-referenced it, looked for patterns. She found one. Hale had focused heavily on 3 specific areas: grain contracts, textile suppliers, and staff wages. The same areas where Clara had made the biggest changes. The same areas where she'd saved the estate the most money. The same areas where the bank's preferred vendors had lost contracts. On the second day, Clara did something she'd never done before. She lied. She told Mrs. Brennan she needed to visit the village on personal business. Then she took a carriage to the bank's regional office in the nearest town and requested a meeting with the manager. "I'm the Duchess of Blackthorne," she said when the man hesitated, "and I have questions about your auditor." The manager, a nervous man named Pritchard, let her in. Clara sat across from him and lied with the kind of calm precision that came from years of making numbers tell stories. "Mr. Hale's audit has uncovered some concerning discrepancies," she said. "Before we proceed, I wanted to verify his credentials. You understand, given the sensitivity of the findings." Pritchard blinked. "His credentials?" "Yes. His employment history, references, the usual verification." Well, I suppose that's reasonable." Pritchard pulled a file. "Mr. Hale came highly recommended. He's worked with several estates in the past year." "Which ones?" Pritchard listed 3 names. Clara wrote them down. "And the outcomes of those audits?" "I'm not sure I should—" "Mr. Pritchard." Clara leaned forward. "If Mr. Hale's findings are accurate, my reputation will be destroyed. If they're not, someone is attempting fraud against a peer of the realm. Either way, I need to know who I'm dealing with." Pritchard swallowed. Then he opened the file wider. 2 of the estates entered extended contracts with our preferred suppliers after the audits," he said slowly. "The third refinanced their debt at a higher interest rate." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "And Mr. Hale? Did he receive compensation for these outcomes?" That would be irregular. But possible." Pritchard said nothing. Clara stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Pritchard. You've been very helpful." She left before he could ask questions. That night she presented Adrian with her findings. "Hale's done this before," she said, spreading papers across the desk. 3 estates in the past year, same pattern. He finds irregularities, pressures the family, and the bank swoops in with new contracts or refinancing deals. all of them benefiting the bank's bottom line. And Hale gets a cut, Adrian said. I can't prove that yet, but yes, I'd bet on it. Adrian studied the papers. Then he looked at her. How did you get this information? I asked nicely. Clara. I went to the bank. I told them I was verifying Hale's credentials. Pritchard was nervous enough to talk. That was reckless. It worked. Adrian exhaled slowly. Yes, it did. He picked up the fabricated report Hale had given him, then set it down next to Clara's research. We take this to my solicitor, he said. Build a formal case. Hale will be dismissed, and the bank will back off. Clara shook her head. That takes too long. By the time the solicitor moves, Hale will have filed his report. The damage will be done. Then what do you suggest? Clara met his eyes. We confront him, tomorrow, in front of witnesses. Force him to defend his evidence publicly. If he's lying, he'll break. And if he doesn't, then we lose. Clara's voice was steady. But at least we lose fighting. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous thing. All right, he said. Let's do it. The confrontation happened in the estate's main hall the next morning. Adrian called a household meeting, staff, key tenants, and Hale. He didn't tell anyone why. When everyone assembled, Adrian stood at the front of the room with Clara beside him. Mr. Hale has completed his audit, Adrian said, his voice carrying. He's made serious allegations regarding the Duchess's management of household finances. Before he submits his report to the bank, I believe he should present his findings here, to the people most affected by them. Hale's smile faltered. Your Grace, that's highly irregular. So is accusing my wife of embezzlement, Adrian said coldly. Present your evidence, Mr. Hale. Let's see how it holds up. The room went silent. Hale hesitated. Then he opened his case, pulling out the report. Very well, he said, if your Grace insists. He began reading. The altered contracts, the falsified payments, the forged signatures. Clara listened without expression. When he finished, she spoke. Mr. Hale, she said calmly, you claim I authorized a payment of £300 to a textile supplier on March 14th. Is that correct? Yes. And you have the signed authorization? I do. Hale held up a document. Clara took it, studied it, then handed it to Mrs. Brennan. Mrs. Brennan, Claire said, is that my signature? The housekeeper looked at the paper, then at Hale. No, Your Grace, she said. It's not even close. Murmurs rippled through the room. Hale's face tightened. The Duchess may not recall. I recall everything I sign, Clara said, because I keep copies. Mrs. Brennan, please bring the ledger from March. Mrs. Brennan disappeared. She returned 2 minutes later with a leather-bound book. Clara opened it, found the date, turned it toward the room. This is the actual authorization from March 14th, she said. A payment of £120, not $300, signed, dated, and witnessed by 2 staff members. She looked at Hale. Your document is a forgery. The room erupted. Hale stepped back. This is absurd. Is it? Adrian's voice cut through the noise. Because the Duchess has just proven you falsified evidence. Would you like to explain why? There must be an error in my records. An error? Clara pulled out the research she'd gathered. Or a pattern. Because I have documentation showing you've conducted similar audits at 3 other estates, all of which coincidentally entered new contracts with the bank's preferred vendors immediately after. Hale's face went white. You set me up, Clara said quietly. You forged documents to make it look like I was embezzling, knowing the scandal would force the Duke to accept whatever terms the bank offered to make it go away. That's a serious accusation, with serious evidence. Adrian stepped forward. You're done here, Hale. Pack your things. Leave my estate. And if I ever see your name attached to this bank again, I'll make sure every peer in England knows exactly what you tried to do. Hale looked around the room, at the staff watching him, at the tenants whose respect he'd never have, at Clara, who stood there like a queen delivering judgment. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Clara said. It is. Hale left within the hour. The household staff erupted into whispered conversations that lasted days, and Clara stood in the main hall long after everyone dispersed, staring at the place where she'd just dismantled a man's career with nothing but ledgers and logic. Adrian found her there. "You did well," he said. Clara didn't answer. "Clara?" She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not relief, exhaustion. "I won because I had the records," she said quietly. "If I'd been less careful, if I'd made one mistake, one error in the books, he would have destroyed me, and you would have believed him." Adrian went still. "No, I wouldn't have." "You don't know that." "I do. Because I'm competent?" Claire's voice cracked. "Because I'm useful?" "Because you're you." The words hung between them. Clara looked away. "I need air." She left before he could respond. Adrian watched her go, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. He'd married Clara because she was practical, logical, someone he could trust not to hurt him the way love had hurt his father. But standing there, watching her walk away, he realized he'd made a miscalculation. He'd assumed Clara couldn't be hurt because she didn't feel. He'd been wrong, and now he had no idea how to fix it. Adrian didn't follow her immediately. He told himself she needed space, that pushing would only make things worse, that Clara was reasonable and would come back when she'd worked through whatever she was feeling. He told himself a lot of things that night. None of them stopped him from standing outside her door at 2 a.m, hand raised to knock, before he finally turned away. Clara didn't come down for breakfast the next morning. Or lunch. Mrs. Brennan brought trays up and returned with them barely touched. "She says she's working," the housekeeper reported, her tone carefully neutral. "On what?" Adrian asked. "She didn't specify, Your Grace." By the third day, Adrian's patience fractured. He didn't knock this time, just opened the connecting door between their rooms, the one that had stayed locked since the wedding, and walked through. Clara was at her desk, surrounded by papers. She didn't look up. "That door was locked for a reason," she said. "I'm aware." "Then you should leave." "No." Adrian closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About what you said, after the confrontation with Hale." Clara's pen stopped moving. She set it down with deliberate care. "I was tired. Forget it. I can't. Try harder. Try." Adrian crossed the room, stopping a few feet from her desk, close enough to see the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "You said I would have believed him," Adrian said. "Hale. You said if you'd made one mistake, I would have believed his lies over your truth. And? And you were wrong." Clara finally looked at him. Her expression was flat, empty. "Was I?" "Yes." "How do you know?" She stood facing him fully. "We've been married 4 months, Adrian. 4 months of polite dinners and separate bedrooms, and a partnership built on the mutual agreement not to feel anything. You don't know me. Not really. I know you're the only person in this house I trust." "You trust my competence," Clara corrected. "You trust that I won't steal from you or ruin the estate, but that's not the same as knowing me." "Then tell me." Adrian's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Tell me what I'm missing." "Why does it matter?" "Because you're my wife. I'm your employee with a title." Clara's laugh was bitter. "Let's not pretend this is something it's not." Adrian felt something crack in his chest. "Is that really what you think?" "It's what we agreed to." "Agreements can change." "Can they?" Clara's eyes were sharp. "Because I don't think you want them to. I think you want a wife who manages your household and doesn't ask for anything you're not willing to give. And I've been that. I've been exactly what you needed." "Clara, but Hale made me realize something." She stepped closer, and Adrian saw the anger in her face now, the hurt. "I've spent my entire life being useful, being invisible, making myself indispensable so people wouldn't discard me. And I thought marrying you would be different. I thought having a title would give me protection, power. It does." "No, it gave me a target." Her voice shook. "Hale went after me because I was the easy mark, the nobody who got too much too fast. And when he presented his evidence, there was a moment, just a moment, where I saw you hesitate." Adrian's stomach dropped. "I didn't." "You did. I saw it in your face. That flicker of doubt. That question. What if she really is lying?" Clara's hands clenched. And I realized that no matter how competent I am, no matter how perfectly I manage your estate, there will always be that doubt. Because you don't trust easily, Adrian. You can't. Your father destroyed that in you. Don't bring my father into this. He's already in it. He's in every decision you make, every wall you've built, every time you choose distance over closeness because closeness hurt you once and you refuse to let it happen again. The words hit like stones. Adrian took a breath. You're right. Clara blinked. What? You're right. I did hesitate. For maybe 3 seconds, I looked at Hale's evidence and thought, what if I'm wrong about her? Adrian stepped closer. But then I looked at you, and I knew. Not because you're competent, not because you're useful, because in 4 months of marriage, you've never once lied to me. Not about the small things, not about the big ones. You've been ruthlessly, exhaustingly honest. That's not, and I trust that, Adrian continued. I trust you, more than I've trusted anyone since I was 9 years old and still stupid enough to believe people were good. Claire stared at him. I'm not asking you to be invisible anymore, Adrian said quietly. I'm asking you to stay. Not as my employee, not as a strategy, as my partner. Real, complicated, messy. I don't know if I can do messy, Clara said. Neither do I. Adrian almost smiled. But we could learn. For a long moment, Clara just looked at him. Then she shook her head. You don't mean that, she said. You're just feeling guilty because I called you out. Maybe, but I still mean it. Adrian, I'm not my father, he said. I won't let emotion destroy what I've built. But I'm also realizing that refusing to feel anything is its own kind of destruction. Slower, quieter, but just as complete. Claire's expression softened, just slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying we try. Actually try. Not a contract, not an arrangement, a marriage. That's terrifying. Yes. What if it doesn't work? Then at least we'll know we attempted something real instead of hiding behind practicality for the rest of our lives. Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. I don't cry, she said. I know. This is your fault. I know that too. She laughed. It was a broken, shaky sound. Then she stepped forward and, very carefully, very deliberately, she took his hand. Adrian felt the touch like a shock. Okay, Clara said. We try. Okay. They stood there, hands clasped, neither of them quite sure what came next. Then Clara pulled back. But I'm still angry at you. Fair. And I'm keeping my own rooms. Also fair. And if you ever hesitate like that again, I'm gone, title or no title. Adrian nodded. Understood. Clara turned back to her desk, but something in her posture had loosened. Now get out. I have work to finish. Adrian left, but this time he didn't lock the connecting door. Neither did she. 3 weeks passed. They were strange weeks, careful, like two people learning to walk after an injury. Adrian started joining Clara in her office in the evenings, not to work, though they often did, but to talk. About the estate, about the tenants, about nothing in particular. Clara started taking meals with him more regularly. Not every night, but enough that the dining room stopped feeling like a museum. They didn't touch often, but when they did, a hand on an elbow, fingers brushing while passing papers, it felt deliberate, chosen. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something. And then the letter arrived. Adrian was in the study when Mrs. Brennan brought it in. The seal was unfamiliar, the handwriting shaky. He opened it. The words inside made his blood go cold. Clara found him 20 minutes later, still holding the letter, his face pale. What happened? She asked. Adrian looked up. For a moment he said nothing. Then he handed her the letter. Clara read it once, twice. Who is Thomas Blackthorne? She asked quietly. My uncle, Adrian said. My father's younger brother. I didn't know you had an uncle. Neither did I. Not really. Adrian stood, pacing. He left when I was 7. Just disappeared one day. My father said he'd gone abroad, that he wanted nothing to do with the family. And now he's dying. Yes. Clara read the letter again. It was from a doctor in a village 2 days' ride north. Thomas Blackthorne had been living there under an assumed name for 25 years. He was ill, Consumption, the doctor wrote. He wouldn't last the month. And in his final days, he'd asked for his nephew. Why now? Clara asked. I don't know. Are you going to go? Adrian stopped pacing. I don't know that either. Clara set the letter down. He's your family. He abandoned us. Maybe he had a reason. Or maybe he was a coward who ran when things got hard. Adrian's voice was sharp. Like my father should have. Clara crossed the room, stopping in front of him. You don't mean that. Don't I? No. Because if your father had left, you wouldn't have learned to survive. You wouldn't have rebuilt this estate. You wouldn't be the man you are now. She paused. You'd probably be softer, happier, but you wouldn't be you. Adrian looked at her. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be true. He exhaled slowly. I should ignore this. Let him die alone. He made his choices. You could, Clara agreed. Or you could go, hear what he has to say, and then decide if it matters. Why would it matter? Because you're wondering. Clara's voice was gentle. I can see it in your face. You're wondering why he left, what he knows, what he might tell you that could change the way you see everything. Adrian wanted to deny it, but she was right. Come with me, he said suddenly. Clara blinked. What? Come with me, to see him. Adrian, I don't think... I need you there. He caught her hand. Please. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. All right, she said, I'll come. They left the next morning. The journey north was long and uncomfortable. The roads were rough, the inns sparse. They barely spoke. Adrian stared out the carriage window, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. Clara let him be. On the second night, they stopped at a small inn near the Scottish border. There was only one room available. We'll take it, Adrian said before Clara could object. The room was small. One bed, a chair by the window, a wash basin in the corner. Clara stood in the doorway, looking at the bed. I can sleep in the chair, Adrian said. Don't be ridiculous. We're both adults. Clara set her bag down. We can share a bed without it meaning anything. Can we? She met his eyes. Do you want it to mean something? Adrian didn't answer. Clara turned away, unpinning her hair. Then it doesn't. They undressed on opposite sides of the room, backs turned, climbed into bed with a careful foot of space between them. Adrian lay staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of her breathing, the warmth of her beside him. Adrian, Clara said in the darkness. Yes? Why did he leave? Really? Adrian was quiet for a long time. I think he saw what my father was becoming. The drinking, the women, the debts, and he couldn't save him, so he saved himself instead. That doesn't make him a coward. Doesn't it? No, it makes him human. Clara shifted, turning toward him. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can only choose whether to drown with them. You sound like you're speaking from experience. My father was a drunk too, Clara said quietly. He died when I was 16. I spent years trying to fix him, hiding bottles, counting money, making excuses. She paused. It didn't work. And when he finally drank himself to death, I felt relieved. Then I felt guilty for feeling relieved. Adrian turned his head to look at her. In the dim light from the window, he could just make out her face. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. It taught me that you can't control people. You can only control how much of yourself you give them. Clara's eyes met his. That's why I understood your proposal, why I accepted it, because I knew you weren't asking me to drown with you. You were asking me to stand beside you. There's a difference. And now? Adrian asked. What am I asking now? Clara smiled. It was small, sad. I think you're asking me to jump and hoping I know how to swim. Adrian reached across the space between them, found her hand, held it. I do, Clara whispered. Know how to swim. Good, Adrian said. Because I'm not sure I do. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts still carefully guarded, but not quite as alone as they'd been before. They reached the village the next afternoon. The doctor's house was small, tucked at the edge of town. A nurse answered the door and led them upstairs to a dim bedroom that smelled of sickness and old wood. Thomas Blackthorne lay in the bed, a shrunken figure barely recognizable as human. His skin was gray, his breathing labored, but his eyes were sharp. "Adrian," he rasped. Adrian stood frozen in the doorway. Clara touched his back gently. He stepped forward. "Hello, Uncle," Adrian said. Thomas's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "You came." "You asked." "I didn't think you would." Thomas coughed, the sound wet and painful. "You look like your mother, so I'm told." "And this?" Thomas's gaze shifted to Clara. "My wife," Adrian said. "Clara." "The Duchess." Thomas studied her. "You married smart. Your father married for beauty. Stupid man." "He was your brother," Adrian said stiffly. "He was an idiot who destroyed everything he touched." Thomas coughed again. "Including you." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Why did you ask me here?" "To tell you the truth." Thomas gestured weakly to a box on the nightstand. "Open it." Adrian hesitated. Then he picked up the box and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Thomas Blackthorne, all unopened. "What are these?" Adrian asked. "Letters from your father," Thomas said. "He wrote to me for 10 years after I left, begging me to come back, to help him, to save the family." He paused. "I never opened them. I was too much of a coward." Clara moved closer, looking at the letters. The dates ranged from 25 years ago to just a few months before Adrian's father died. "Why are you showing me this?" Adrian asked. "Because I want you to know I failed him." Thomas's voice cracked. "I saw what he was becoming. I saw the drinking, the gambling, the women. And instead of staying, instead of fighting for him, I ran. I told myself it was self-preservation, that I couldn't save him if he didn't want to be saved." "You were right," Adrian said. "No, I was a coward." Thomas met Adrian's eyes. "And my cowardice destroyed him. If I'd stayed, if I'd tried, he still would have drunk himself to death," Adrian said flatly. "Just with you there to watch." Thomas flinched. "You want absolution," Adrian continued. "You want me to say you made the right choice, that leaving was justified, but I can't give you that, because your leaving meant my mother had to face it alone. It meant I had to grow up watching my father destroy everything while everyone else pretended not to see." "Adrian," Clara said softly. He ignored her. "You asked me here to ease your conscience before you die, but I'm not interested in making you feel better about abandoning your family." Thomas closed his eyes. "You're right. I know I am. But there's something else." Thomas opened his eyes again. "Something you need to know." "What?" Thomas gestured to the box. "Under the letters, there's a deed." Adrian dug through the letters, found a folded document at the bottom. He opened it. His hands started shaking. "What is it?" Clara asked. Adrian's voice came out hoarse. "It's a land deed for 200 acres bordering the Blackthorne estate. I bought it 20 years ago," Thomas said, "with money I'd saved before I left. I was going to give it to your father, thought it might help pull the estate back from ruin." He coughed. "But I never did. Kept telling myself I'd go back, that I'd face him. I never found the courage. So you're giving it to me instead." "It's yours. Always should have been." Thomas's breathing grew more labored. "I know it doesn't make up for what I didn't do, but maybe it helps with what you're trying to build." Adrian stared at the deed. 200 acres. Good land, from what he could see, worth easily £10,000. It would change everything. "Why now?" he asked. "Because I'm dying, and I want to do one thing right before I go." Adrian looked at the man in the bed, at the uncle who'd run when things got hard, who'd stayed away for 25 years. Part of him wanted to refuse, to throw the deed back and walk away. But Clara's hand found his shoulder, a gentle pressure. He looked at her. She nodded once. Adrian folded the deed carefully. "Thank you." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "You're better than both of us, your father and me. You stayed. You fought. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made the right one." Thomas died 3 days later. Adrian and Clara stayed through the funeral. There were few mourners, a handful of villagers who'd known him as the quiet man who kept to himself. They buried Thomas Blackthorne in a plot far from the family he'd abandoned, and Adrian felt nothing. Clara stood beside him, her hand in his, and said nothing. On the journey back, Adrian was quiet again, but this time Clara could feel the difference, the weight pressing down on him. "Talk to me," she said finally. "About what?" "About what you're thinking." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I spent my whole life hating my father for being weak, for choosing his addictions over his family, over me. And now I'm wondering if I'm just as bad." He looked at her. "I chose distance over connection, control over trust. I built walls so high that even you, my own wife, thought I'd believe lies about you before I'd believe you. You're not your father, Adrian." "How do you know?" "Because your father destroyed things," Clara said. "You build them, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to run. Thomas ran, and look where it got him, dying alone in a village where no one knew his real name." Clara's voice was firm. "You're nothing like him either. You stayed. You fought. You're still fighting." Adrian closed his eyes. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be married. Actually married. Not the arrangement we started with." "Neither do I," Clara admitted, "but we figure it out, together." Adrian opened his eyes, looked at her. "You mean that?" "Yes." He reached for her hand. She gave it. And for the first time since they'd married, Adrian kissed her. Not the brief formality from their wedding. This was slow, deliberate, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Clara's cheeks were flushed. "We're in a moving carriage," she said. "I noticed. This is highly improper. Should I stop?" Clara considered, then she smiled. "No." They arrived back at the estate 6 days after they'd left. Adrian immediately began the process of integrating the new land into the estate. Clara helped, working through surveys and contracts and tenant agreements. They fell into a new rhythm, one that felt less like partnership and more like marriage. Adrian started spending nights in Clara's room, not every night, but enough that the connecting door stayed permanently unlocked. Clara started letting herself be seen, not just as the competent duchess, but as a woman who laughed at Adrian's dry humor and argued with him about crop rotations, and fell asleep reading reports with her head on his shoulder. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still retreated to their separate corners when things got hard. But it was real. And then, 8 weeks after they returned, everything fell apart. Clara was in the estate office, reviewing the quartermaster's latest reports, when she found it. A discrepancy. Small. Almost invisible. But there. She pulled the supply ledgers, cross-referenced them with the bank statements. The numbers didn't match. Someone was moving money. Quietly. Carefully. In amounts small enough to miss if you weren't looking. Clara's stomach dropped. She spent the next 3 hours tracing the transactions, following the thread, building the pattern. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. Because the unauthorized transfers all traced back to one account, Adrian's personal account. The money wasn't being stolen from the estate. It was being paid out, regularly. To an address in London Clara didn't recognize. She sat staring at the numbers, feeling the floor drop out from under her. Adrian had been lying to her, for months, and she had no idea why. Clara waited until dinner, kept her voice calm, her face neutral. "Adrian," she said as they sat down, "I need to ask you about something." "Of course." She slid the ledger across the table. "Can you explain these transfers?" Adrian glanced down. His face went carefully blank. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I'm the Duchess. I have access to all household accounts." Clara kept her tone even. "Including yours." "This is different." "Is it?" Clara leaned forward. "Because it looks like you've been making regular payments to an address in London for the past 6 months, payments that don't appear in any estate records, payments you never mentioned." Adrian set down his fork. "Clara, who are you paying?" Her voice shook despite her efforts to control it. "What are you hiding?" "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Adrian stood, paced to the window. When he turned back, his expression was something Clara had never seen before. guilt. There's someone in London, he said quietly. Someone I've been supporting. Clara felt her chest tighten. Who? A woman. The word hit like a slap. A woman, Clara repeated. It's not… Clara, let me explain. You've been paying a woman in London for 6 months, while married to me. Clara stood, her chair scraping back. What exactly is there to explain? She's not my mistress. Then who is she? Adrian's jaw worked. My half-sister. Silence. Clara stared at him. What? My father had an affair 20 years ago. The woman got pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter. Adrian's voice was flat. My father paid her to keep quiet, to disappear. She took the money and raised the child alone in London. And you found out when? Last year. Right before I met you. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. She wrote to me, said her mother had died, that she was alone, that she needed help. So you've been sending her money? Yes. For months. Yes. And you never told me. Clara's voice was ice. We agreed to honesty, Adrian, to transparency, and you've been lying to me for half our marriage. I wasn't lying. You were hiding it. Clara's control snapped. That's the same thing. I was protecting you. From what? From this. Adrian gestured sharply. From the scandal, the questions, the fact that my father had a bastard daughter he paid off like she was a mistake to be erased. So you decided to handle it alone, to keep secrets, to shut me out. I was trying to keep you safe. I don't need you to keep me safe. Clara's hands clenched. I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I can handle the truth. Clara, but you don't. You still don't. She stepped back. You said you trusted me. You said we were partners. But the first time something difficult happens, you revert to what you know. Distance, control, secrets. That's not fair. Isn't it? Clara's voice broke. I have spent months proving myself to you, months earning your trust, and at the first sign of something complicated, you shut me out like I'm still the stranger you married. You're not… Then why didn't you tell me? Adrian opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer. Clara turned away. I need space. Clara, please. No. She held up a hand. Not right now. I can't. I need to think. She left before he could stop her. Adrian stood alone in the dining room, staring at the ledger on the table, and for the first time since he was 9 years old, he felt the sharp, unmistakable sting of regret. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in her office, staring at the numbers, replaying the conversation over and over. A half-sister. A secret. Money sent in silence. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't betrayal in the traditional sense, but it felt like one. Because Adrian had looked at her, his wife, his partner, and decided she couldn't be trusted with the truth. The door opened. Clara didn't look up. I said I needed space. I know. Adrian's voice was rough. But I'm not leaving until you hear me out. I heard you. You have a secret half-sister. You've been supporting her. You didn't tell me because you wanted to protect me from scandal. Clara finally looked at him. What else is there? Her name is Margaret, Adrian said. She's 19. She's been living in a boarding house in London, working as a seamstress. When her mother died, she had nothing. No family, no money, no prospects. So you sent her funds? Yes. Enough to live on, to keep a roof over her head. Why didn't you bring her here? Adrian flinched. Because she's proof of my father's sins. Because bringing her to the estate would have raised questions I didn't want to answer. Because… He stopped. Because you were ashamed of her, Clara finished quietly. No, I was ashamed of him. Of what he did to her mother. Of the fact that he had a daughter he refused to acknowledge. Adrian's voice cracked. Margaret deserves better than being hidden. But I didn't know how to give her that without destroying everything I'd built. Clara stood, walked to him, looked him in the eye. You should have told me, she said. I know. I would have helped you. I know that too. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. I'm sorry. Sorry for lying? Sorry for not trusting you enough to tell the truth. Clara stared at him, at the man who'd offered her a partnership and then forgotten what that meant. Bring her here, she said. Adrian blinked. What? Margaret, your sister. Bring her to the estate. Clara, the scandal. Let them talk, Clara said. She's your family. She shouldn't have to hide because your father was a coward. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. I'm asking you to choose trust over fear, to choose family over reputation. Clara's voice was steady. I'm asking you to prove that we're really partners, not just when it's convenient. Adrian stared at her. You're serious? Completely. They'll crucify us. Probably. Clara almost smiled. But we've survived worse. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he stepped forward and pulled Clara into his arms. She stiffened. Then slowly, carefully, she relaxed into him. I don't deserve you, Adrian said against her hair. No, Clara agreed. But you're stuck with me anyway. Thank you. They stood there holding each other in the dim office, while outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the tree line. Edwin Hale had been dismissed from the estate, discredited, humiliated. But he hadn't disappeared. He'd been waiting, watching, gathering information. And now, standing in the shadows with a letter clutched in his hand, a letter detailing every secret Adrian had tried to hide. Hale smiled. Revenge, he'd learned, was best served with evidence, and he had plenty. Hale moved through the village tavern like smoke, quiet, deliberate, buying rounds for men whose loyalty could be purchased for the price of a pint. He'd been doing this for 3 weeks now, ever since his dismissal, listening, learning, collecting fragments of gossip and stitching them into something useful. The letter he'd received 2 days ago had been a gift, an anonymous tip from someone in London, someone who'd noticed the Duke's regular payments to an address in the slums, someone who'd done the digging Hale couldn't afford to do himself. Margaret Blackthorne, bastard daughter of the late Duke, hidden shame of a family that prided itself on legacy. It was perfect. Hale folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat. Tomorrow, he'd take it to the papers. The scandal sheets would pay handsomely for this kind of filth. And once the story broke, the Duke's carefully rebuilt reputation would crumble. The estate would be vulnerable again, and this time Hale would make sure Clara Blackthorne went down with it. He smiled into his drink. Revenge tasted better than he'd imagined. Margaret Blackthorne arrived at the estate on a gray morning that threatened rain but never delivered. She stepped out of the carriage looking like she expected to be turned away at any moment, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, a worn traveling bag clutched in both hands. She was small, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and a face that would have been pretty if it weren't so carefully blank. Clara watched from the front steps as Adrian approached his half-sister. He moved awkwardly, like a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle. Margaret, he said. Your Grace. The girl's voice was barely audible. I can leave if you've changed your mind. We haven't. Adrian glanced back at Clara. She nodded once. He turned back to Margaret. You're welcome here, as long as you want to stay. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. Thank you. Clara descended the steps, extending her hand. I'm Clara, the current Duchess. Margaret stared at the offered hand like it was a trap. Then, very carefully, she shook it. I won't cause trouble, Margaret said quickly. I'll stay out of the way. I can work. I'm good with numbers, and I can sew, and... You're not here to work, Clara interrupted gently. You're here because you're family. Margaret's composure cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Adrian looked panicked. Clara stepped forward and, very deliberately, pulled the girl into an embrace. Margaret stiffened. Then she collapsed into Clara's shoulder and wept. Over the girl's head, Clara met Adrian's eyes. He looked stunned, lost. Clara mouthed, "We'll figure it out." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. The staff reacted to Margaret's arrival with the kind of polite confusion that came from years of training. Mrs. Brennan assigned her a room in the family wing. The maids prepared tea. No one asked questions, but Clara could see the speculation in their eyes, the way they looked at Margaret and then at Adrian, searching for resemblance. They'd find it. Margaret had the same sharp jaw, the same gray eyes. It was only a matter of time before someone put the pieces together. That night, Clara found Adrian in the study, staring at nothing. She's terrified, Clara said, closing the door behind her. I know. She thinks we're going to send her away. I know that too. Adrian rubbed his face. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone's brother. You learn. Clara sat across from him. The same way you learned to be a husband. That's going well, Adrian said dryly. It's going better? Clara leaned forward. Margaret needs stability. She needs to know she's not temporary, that this isn't charity. What is it then? Family. Clara's voice was firm. Messy, complicated, but family. Adrian looked at her. You're the one who's going to pay the price for this. When the gossip starts. When people realize who she is. Let them gossip. Clara, I mean it. Clara stood, moving around the desk to stand beside him. I spent my life being invisible because I thought it was safer. But you're teaching me something, Adrian. You don't survive by hiding. You survive by standing your ground and daring the world to push back. Adrian caught her hand. When did you become so reckless? When I married you. He almost smiled. Then his expression darkened. There's something you should know. What? I received word from London yesterday. Someone's been asking questions about Margaret, about my payments to her. Clara's stomach dropped. Who? I don't know, but whoever it is, they're digging deep. Adrian's grip tightened on her hand. The story's going to break, soon. We need to be ready. How do we get ready for something like this? Adrian met her eyes. We tell the truth first, before anyone else can twist it. Clara understood immediately. You want to announce it publicly? Yes. That's insane. It's the only way. Adrian stood, pacing. If we control the narrative, if we introduce Margaret as my sister before the scandal sheets do it for us, we take away their power. Or we hand them the scandal on a platter. Maybe, but at least it's our plating. Clara thought about it, about the risk, about the way society would react to the Duke of Blackthorne acknowledging his father's bastard. Then she thought about Margaret, upstairs in her room, probably still crying. All right, Clara said. We do it your way. You're sure? No, but I trust you. Adrian crossed the room and kissed her, hard, desperate. When they pulled apart, Clara was breathless. We should probably tell Margaret first, she said. Probably. Neither of them moved. They found Margaret in the library the next morning, curled in a chair with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when they entered, immediately setting the book aside and standing. Did I do something wrong? No, Clara said quickly. Sit, please. Margaret sat. Adrian and Clara took the chairs across from her. We need to tell you something, Adrian began. And we need you to understand that this is your choice. We won't force you into anything you're not comfortable with. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. What is it? We're going to announce your existence publicly, Clara said. Acknowledge you as Adrian's sister. Make it official. Margaret went pale. You can't. We can, Adrian said, and we should have done it months ago. Do you know what will happen? Margaret's voice shook. The scandal, the gossip. People will say terrible things about my mother, about me, about you. Let them, Clara said. You don't understand. I do. Clara leaned forward. I understand that you've spent your entire life being treated as a mistake, something shameful, something to hide. And I understand that Adrian's father did that to you. But Adrian isn't his father, and I'm not going to let you be erased because small-minded people can't handle the truth. Margaret stared at her. Why do you care? Because you're family, Clara said simply, and family doesn't hide. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. I don't want to ruin you. You won't, Adrian said. But even if you did, even if acknowledging you cost us everything, it would be worth it. Why? Adrian met her eyes. Because you're my sister, and you deserve better than being paid off and forgotten. Margaret broke. She doubled over, sobbing, and this time Adrian was the one who moved forward. He knelt beside her chair and, awkwardly, put his arms around her. I'm sorry, he said, roughly. I'm sorry it took me this long. I'm sorry you've been alone. I'm sorry for all of it. Margaret clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Clara watched them and felt something fierce settle in her chest. They were going to fight for this girl, and they were going to win. The announcement went out 3 days later. Adrian drafted it himself. A brief, formal statement acknowledging Margaret as his father's daughter and welcoming her into the family. No excuses. No apologies for her existence, just facts. They sent it to every major paper in London. The response was immediate. The scandal sheets erupted. Headlines screamed about secret families and fallen dukes. Cartoons appeared depicting Adrian's father with various mistresses. Letters poured in, some supportive, most vicious. Lady Pemberton called Clara a fool who'd married beneath herself and was now paying for it. Lord Hastings suggested Adrian be stripped of his title for moral degeneracy. 3 families canceled social engagements. The rector refused to acknowledge Margaret during Sunday service. And through it all, Clara stood beside Adrian and Margaret, chin up, refusing to flinch. "It'll pass," she told Margaret after a particularly brutal article appeared, calling the girl the bastard stain on Blackthorne honor. "Will it?" Margaret's voice was hollow. "Or will I always be this?" "You'll always be you," Clara said, "and that has nothing to do with what your father did or didn't do. People don't see it that way. Then we teach them to." Margaret looked at her. "How?" Clara smiled. It was sharp. "By refusing to be ashamed." The first crack in the wall of judgment came from an unexpected source. Constance arrived at the estate 2 weeks after the announcement, her carriage rattling up the drive like an invading army. She swept into the house without waiting to be announced, found Adrian in his study, and shut the door. Clara, working in the next room, heard the shouting through the walls. "Complete fool." "My decision." Dragging the family name through. The argument lasted 20 minutes. Then the door opened and Constance emerged, tight-lipped and furious. She saw Clara standing in the hallway. "You," Constance said, "this was your idea." Clara lifted her chin. "Yes. You convinced him to acknowledge the girl publicly. I supported his decision. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Constance stepped closer. "The gossip, the scandal. Half of London thinks Adrian's lost his mind. The other half thinks he's honorable," Clara said evenly, "for taking responsibility for his father's mistakes." "Honorable?" Constance's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "What would you call it?" "Reckless, unnecessary, a sentimental gesture that will cost him dearly." Clara held her ground. "Margaret is his sister. She deserves to be acknowledged. She's a bastard. She's a child who lost her mother and had nowhere to go. That's not our problem." "It is now." Clara's voice hardened. "Adrian made it our problem. I agreed with him. And we're not changing our minds no matter how much London gossips." Constance stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "You've gotten bolder," she said. "I've gotten married. To a man who brings home strays and expects the world to accept it. To a man who does the right thing even when it's hard," Clara corrected. "I thought you'd respect that." Constance was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Where is she?" she asked. "Margaret?" "Yes." "In the drawing room." "Why?" "Because if I'm going to defend this family's decision to London society, I should probably meet the girl they're so busy condemning." Clara's eyes widened. "You're going to defend us?" "I'm going to defend my grandson," Constance corrected. "You just happen to be attached to him." But as she swept past Clara toward the drawing room, Clara heard her mutter, "Reckless. Both of you. Absolutely reckless." Clara smiled. Margaret was reading when Constance entered. She stood immediately, setting the book aside. "Lady Constance," she said nervously, "I didn't know you were—" "Sit down, girl," Constance commanded. Margaret sat. Constance studied her with the intensity of a general inspecting troops. Margaret endured it, chin up, hands folded. "You have your father's eyes," Constance said finally. Margaret flinched. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for your face," Constance sat across from her. "Tell me something. Do you want to be here?" "Yes." "Why?" Margaret hesitated. "Because for the first time in my life, someone's treating me like I matter, like I'm not something to be hidden or paid off or forgotten." "Adrian and Clara." "Yes." "They're fools," Constance said. Margaret's expression shuddered. "If you're here to tell me to leave, I'm here to tell you that if you're staying, you need to learn how to fight." Constance leaned forward. "Because London society is vicious. They will tear you apart if you give them the chance. They'll call you names, question your character, try to make you feel small. They already are. And how are you responding? By staying in this house and trying not to cause more trouble. Wrong answer. Constance's voice was sharp. You respond by walking into every room like you own it, by refusing to flinch, by making them uncomfortable with their own cruelty. Margaret stared at her. I don't know how to do that. Then I'll teach you. Constance stood. Starting with posture, sit up straighter. You're a Blackthorne now, whether London likes it or not. Margaret straightened automatically. Constance nodded. Better. Now stand. Margaret stood. Walk across the room, shoulders back, eyes forward. Margaret walked, stiffly, self-consciously. Again, Constance commanded. This time, pretend you're about to inherit a fortune, and everyone in the room wants a piece of it. Margaret tried again. This time, there was a hint of confidence in her steps. Constance smiled. Better. We'll make a lady of you yet. From the doorway, Clara watched the transformation begin. The second crack came from the tenants. Adrian held a quarterly meeting with the estate's tenant farmers, a routine gathering to discuss yields, rents, and repairs. Clara attended as she always did now, sitting beside Adrian and taking notes. This time, Margaret came too. The tenants stared when she entered. Whispers rippled through the room. Adrian stood. Some of you have heard the news from London. For those who haven't, this is Margaret Blackthorne, my half-sister. She's staying at the estate permanently. Silence. Then John Whitfield, the eldest tenant, spoke. She related to the old Duke? Yes, Adrian said flatly. The one who near bankrupted us all? Yes. Whitfield looked at Margaret, then at Adrian. She have anything to do with that? No, she was a child. Whitfield nodded slowly. Then she's welcome, far as I'm concerned. Sins of the father and all that. Another tenant spoke up. My wife says the London papers are calling her all sorts of names. London papers don't live here, Whitfield said. We do. And from where I'm sitting, the Duke's done right by his blood. That's what matters. One by one, the other tenants nodded. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, but not fast enough. After the meeting, Whitfield approached her. You all right, miss? Yes, Margaret said. Thank you for what you said. Just the truth. Whitfield shrugged. You're the Duke's family. That makes you part of this place. Anyone gives you trouble, you let us know. Margaret nodded, too overcome to speak. That night, Margaret found Clara in her office. They defended me, she said. The tenants. People I've never met. Because you're one of us now, Clara said simply. But the scandal doesn't matter here. Clara set down her pen. London can gossip all it wants, but this estate runs on work, not reputation, and you're part of the family that keeps it running. Margaret sat down heavily. I never expected this. What did you expect? To be tolerated. Maybe. Certainly not welcomed. Clara smiled. Get used to it. But the real shift came when the letter arrived. It was delivered 3 weeks after the announcement. Not to Adrian, to Clara. The handwriting was familiar. She opened it with a sense of dread. Inside was a single page. Edwin Hale's signature at the bottom. Duchess, I have information that will destroy you and your husband. Meet me at the old grain mill tomorrow at noon if you wish to prevent its publication. Come alone. E.H. Clara read it twice. Then she stood, crossed to Adrian's study, and handed it to him without a word. Adrian's face darkened. He's bluffing. Is he? What information could he possibly have that's worse than what we've already announced? Clara thought about it. The payments. The fact that you hid Margaret for months before acknowledging her. He could twist it into something worse. Make it look like coercion or fraud. That's ridiculous. Since when has that stopped a scandal sheet? Adrian crumpled the letter. I'm going with you. He said to come alone. I don't care. Adrian, no. His voice was steel. I'm not letting you walk into a trap by yourself. Clara considered arguing. Then she saw his face, the fear beneath the anger, and nodded. All right, she said. We go together. The old grain mill sat on the edge of the estate, abandoned for a decade. The roof had partially collapsed. The walls were rotting. It was the perfect place for something ugly. Adrian and Clara arrived at noon. Hale was already there, leaning against a support beam like he owned the place. Your Grace, he said, nodding to Clara. And the Duke. I said to come alone. She did, Adrian said coldly. I followed. Hale smiled. How romantic. What do you want, Hale? Clara asked. To make you an offer. Hale pulled a folder from his coat. I have documentation here proving that the Duke has been funneling estate funds to support his illegitimate sister, that he falsified records to hide the payments, that the Duchess knew and assisted in the cover-up. That's a lie, Clara said. Is it? Because I have bank statements, ledger entries, all pointing to fraud. Hale opened the folder, showing them pages of numbers. The papers will love this. The Duke who bankrupted his estate once already, doing it again to support his father's mistakes. Adrian stepped forward. How much do you want? Not money. Hale's smile widened. I want you to publicly discredit your wife, divorce her, claim she manipulated you into acknowledging Margaret as part of a scheme to gain control of the estate. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Never, Adrian said. Then I'll publish this, and you'll both be ruined. Adrian started to speak. Clara cut him off. Show me the documents, she said. Hale handed them over, smug. Clara flipped through them. Bank statements, ledger entries, transfer records, all of them meticulously forged. She looked up at Hale. These are fake. Prove it. I don't have to. Clara smiled. It was cold, sharp. Because I know who you paid to make them. Hale's smile faltered. You used the same forger who created the documents for your first attempt to frame me, Clara continued. Same ink, same paper stock, same handwriting quirks. She tapped one of the entries. This signature, for example. It's mine, supposedly, but the capital W has a flourish I never use. The same flourish that appeared in the forged grain contract. You're reaching... Am I? Clara stepped closer. Because I kept copies of your first forgeries, Hale. And I can prove they match these, which means I can prove you've been systematically attempting to defraud the Duke of Blackthorne. Not once, twice. Hale's face went pale. So here's my offer, Clara said. You take your fake documents and disappear. Leave London. Leave England, preferably. And in exchange, I don't have you arrested for fraud and extortion. You're bluffing. Try me. The two of them stared at each other. Then Adrian spoke. She's not bluffing, Hale. And neither am I. You have until sundown to be off my land. If I see you again, I'll have you arrested. And unlike you, I actually have evidence. Hale looked between them. At Clara's cold certainty, at Adrian's rage. He grabbed his folder and ran. They watched him go. Then Clara's knees buckled. Adrian caught her, pulling her against him. Are you all right? No. Clara's voice shook. I'm furious and terrified, and I think I'm going to be sick. You were incredible. I was guessing about the forger. I had no proof. Adrian stared at her. What? I recognized the handwriting style, but I couldn't prove it came from the same person. I gambled that Hale would panic if I sounded certain enough. Clara looked up at him. I gambled, Adrian, and if I'd been wrong, you weren't. But I could have been. Adrian kissed her, hard, desperate. You weren't, he repeated, and even if you had been, we would have fought, together. Clara kissed him back. They stood in the ruins of the grain mill, holding each other, while the threat of Edwin Hale disappeared into the distance. The news reached London within days. Edwin Hale, disgraced auditor, had fled England under mysterious circumstances. Rumors swirled about fraud, about forgeries, about an attempt to extort the Duke of Blackthorne that had ended badly. The scandal sheets, always hungry for new meat, turned on Hale with savage efficiency. His past audits were reviewed, his connections questioned. Within a week, 3 banks severed ties with him. And slowly, grudgingly, London society began to reassess the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne. Maybe acknowledging the bastard daughter wasn't reckless. Maybe it was honorable. Maybe the Duke wasn't weak. Maybe he was strong enough to do the right thing despite the cost. Maybe the Duchess wasn't a schemer. Maybe she was the kind of woman who stared down blackmailers and won. The invitations started arriving again. Not many, but enough. And when Clara and Adrian attended their first ball since the announcement, with Margaret on Adrian's arm, the room didn't go silent. It whispered. But not with condemnation, with curiosity. Lady Pemberton approached them halfway through the evening. She looked like swallowing glass would have been more pleasant. "Your Grace," she said to Clara, "I may have been hasty in my previous assessment." "May have been?" Clara's voice was mild. Lady Pemberton's jaw tightened. "You've conducted yourself with remarkable dignity through a difficult situation." "Thank you, Lady Pemberton." "And Miss Blackthorne," Lady Pemberton turned to Margaret, who stood frozen beside Adrian. "You're welcome to call on my daughters, if you wish. They're always looking for intelligent company." Margaret's eyes went wide. Thank you." Lady Pemberton nodded stiffly and swept away. Margaret turned to Clara, stunned. "Did that just happen?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because we won," Clara said simply, "and people respect winners." Adrian caught Clara's hand. "Dance with me." "I don't dance well." "Neither do I. We'll manage." They moved on to the floor. Margaret watched them go, a small smile on her face. Across the room, Constance observed the scene with satisfaction. Then she approached Margaret. "Come, girl, I'll introduce you to some people who matter." "I don't know if I'm ready." "You are." Constance's voice was firm. "And if you're not, I'll make them think you are." "That's almost as good." Margaret followed her grandmother by law into the crowd, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, she walked with her shoulders back. Later that night, back at the estate, Clara found Adrian on the terrace. He was staring out at the dark grounds, hands in his pockets. She joined him without speaking. "We did it," Adrian said finally. "We did. I wasn't sure we would." "Neither was I." Clara leaned against the railing. "But we're still standing." "More than standing." Adrian turned to look at her. "We're winning." "Are we?" "Margaret is safe. Hale is gone. London is starting to come around. The estate is stable." He caught her hand. "And I have you." Clara squeezed his fingers. "You do." "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's breath caught. "What?" "I love you," Adrian repeated. "I should have said it weeks ago, months ago, maybe. But I was too afraid." "Of what?" "Of this. Of feeling something I couldn't control. Of needing you and then losing you." Adrian's grip tightened. "But I'm more afraid of never telling you, of letting you think this is still just a partnership when it stopped being that the moment you walked into that grain mill and bluffed a man twice your size into running." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That's a terrible romantic speech." "I know. You're supposed to say something about my eyes or my smile. Your eyes are brown and your smile is rare. But when you do smile, it feels like winning." Clara laughed. It came out half sob. "I love you too, you impossible man." "Since when?" "Since you asked me to dance at the masquerade. Maybe earlier, I'm not sure." Adrian pulled her close, kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Just two people who'd started as strangers, become partners, and somehow found their way to love. When they finally pulled apart, Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Adrian's voice was quiet. "Now we live. We fight when we need to. We build what matters. And we stop being afraid of what we have." "Sounds complicated." "Probably will be." Clara smiled against his coat. "Good. I like complicated." They stood together on the terrace while the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who'd taken the coldest arrangement and turned it into something burning. And somewhere in London, the scandal sheets moved on to fresh meat. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne had become yesterday's news, which meant they'd finally won. Yesterday's news lasted exactly 6 weeks. Then the Duke of Blackthorne received a summons from Parliament. It arrived on a cold October morning, delivered by a royal courier who refused to meet Adrian's eyes. The envelope was heavy, sealed with wax that bore the parliamentary crest. Clara found Adrian in the study, the opened letter on his desk, his face carved from stone. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter without speaking. Clara read it once, then again, slower, making sure she understood. A formal inquiry into the financial management of the Blackthorne estate. Allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of title. A hearing scheduled for 3 weeks hence, during which the Duke would be required to present a full accounting of the estate's finances for the past 5 years. At the bottom, in smaller print, failure to comply will result in the revocation of title and seizure of estate assets. Clara set the letter down carefully. Hale. It has to be. Adrian's voice was flat. He didn't run far enough. He's been feeding information to someone in Parliament, twisting facts, building a case. Can they actually do this? Strip a title? If they can prove gross mismanagement or criminal activity, yes. Adrian stood, pacing. It's rare, but not impossible. You haven't done anything criminal. I married a woman with no background, acknowledged a bastard sister, and restructured the estate's finances without consulting the traditional oversight boards. Adrian's laugh was bitter. That's enough to raise questions, and questions in the right hands become accusations. Clara's mind raced. We have records, documentation, proof of everything we've done. We also have enemies. People who never forgave my father for his failures. People who see me as a continuation of that failure. Adrian stopped pacing, turning to face her. They want the Blackthorne title gone. This is their chance. Then we fight. Clara, we fight, she repeated. We go to London. We present our case. We show them exactly what you've built here. And we make them choose between truth and politics. Adrian stared at her. You make it sound simple. It won't be, but we've done harder things. Have we? We survived Hale. We survived the scandal. We survived each other. Clara crossed to him, taking his hands. We can survive this. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't know what I did to deserve you, he said quietly. You asked me to dance, Clara said. Everything else followed. They left for London the next day. Margaret insisted on coming. If they're attacking you because of me, I should be there. This isn't about you, Adrian said. Isn't it? Margaret's chin lifted. They're saying you mismanaged the estate to support your illegitimate sister. I'm that sister, so yes, this is about me. She's right, Clara said. And honestly, we could use the extra help. If we're presenting a full accounting, we'll need every hand we can get. Adrian looked between them, his wife and his sister, both stubborn, both refusing to back down. Fine, he said. But you follow my lead in Parliament. Of course, Margaret said. Clara said nothing. Adrian gave her a look. I'll consider your lead, Clara amended, and make my own decisions as appropriate. Adrian sighed. That's what I thought. They took rooms at the Blackthorne London house, a narrow townhouse in Mayfair that Adrian had kept despite selling off most of the family's other properties. It was drafty and needed repairs, but it was theirs. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Clara, Adrian, and Margaret worked 16-hour days. They pulled every financial record from the past 5 years. Cross-referenced accounts. Built spreadsheets. Created summaries. Clara organized the documentation into a presentation that would walk Parliament through every decision Adrian had made. The cancelled contracts, the renegotiated debts, the staff restructuring, the land acquisition from Thomas. Adrian prepared his testimony. He wrote and rewrote his opening statement until the words felt true without sounding defensive. Margaret learned the numbers. She might not testify, but if they needed someone to verify details, she'd be ready. Mrs. Brennan arrived from the estate with additional records they'd forgotten. Constance appeared unannounced with a list of parliamentary members who might be sympathetic and those who were already bought. Lord Ashford is your enemy, Constance said, pointing to a name. He's been trying to acquire Blackthorne land for a decade. This hearing is his chance. And supporters? Adrian asked. Fewer than you'd like, but Lord Whitmore owes me a favor, and Lady Hastings despises Ashford more than she dislikes scandal. Constance folded her hands. It'll be close. How close? Close enough that your testimony matters. If you falter, you lose. Adrian didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Claire found him at 3 a.m, sitting in the study with his statement in front of him, staring at nothing. Come to bed, she said. I can't. You need rest. I need to win. Adrian looked at her, and Clara saw the fear in his eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with money or reputation, and everything to do with losing the one thing he'd built his entire adult life protecting. If we lose this, if they take the estate, they won't. You don't know that. No, but I know you. Clara sat beside him. I know you rebuilt that estate from ruin. I know you made decisions that saved families and livelihoods. I know you did it without cutting corners or cheating or taking the easy way out. That might not matter. Then we make it matter. Clara took his hand. Tomorrow, you walk into that chamber and you tell them the truth. Not what they want to hear, not what's politically convenient, the truth. And you let them decide what kind of men they want to be. Adrian's grip tightened on her hand. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we lose, and we rebuild again. Clara met his eyes. But we do it together, no matter what. Adrian pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I love you, he said. I know. No, I need you to understand. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we lose or keep, you're the thing I can't survive losing. Clara's throat tightened. You won't lose me. Promise. I promise. They sat together in the darkness until dawn broke over London. The parliamentary chamber was packed. Lords and members of parliament filled the benches. Observers crowded the gallery. Reporters sat with notebooks ready. Clara took a seat in the gallery beside Margaret. Constance sat on Margaret's other side, spine straight, expression unreadable. Adrian stood at the front of the chamber, alone. Lord Ashford opened the inquiry. He was a heavy man with cold eyes and a politician's smile. He read the charges slowly, making each word land like a stone. Financial mismanagement, unauthorized restructuring, questionable appointments, support of illegitimate family members using estate funds. How do you answer these charges, Your Grace? Ashford asked. Adrian met his eyes. I answer them with facts. For the next hour, Adrian walked the chamber through every decision he'd made. He presented ledgers, showed income versus expenditure charts, demonstrated how the estate had gone from £40,000 in debt to profitable in 4 years. And the accusations of embezzlement? Ashford interrupted. Fabrications, Adrian said flatly, created by a disgraced auditor named Edwin Hale, who attempted to extort my wife and myself when his initial fraud was discovered. You have proof of this? I have the forged documents, the testimony of my household staff, and bank records showing Hale fled the country 3 months ago after his scheme collapsed. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ashford's expression tightened. And your sister, Miss Margaret Blackthorne, the estate has been supporting her financially? Yes. Using funds that should have gone to estate maintenance? No! Adrian's voice was ice. Using my personal income, which I'm entitled to spend as I see fit. Your personal income derives from the estate, which I manage, successfully. The estate's accounts are separate from my own. Every transaction is documented, every pound accounted for. Adrian stepped forward. Would you like to see the records, Lord Ashford? I brought 5 years' worth. Ashford hesitated. Then Lord Whitmore spoke from the benches. I'd like to see them. Adrian nodded to Clara. She stood, producing a leather case, and descended from the gallery. She handed the documents to a clerk, who distributed them to the reviewing committee. For 20 minutes, the chamber was silent except for the rustle of papers. Then Lord Whitmore looked up. These are exceptionally detailed. My wife keeps thorough records, Adrian said. Your wife? Ashford's tone was pointed. The former Miss Clara Whitmore, a woman of no standing who you married under questionable circumstances. In the gallery, Margaret tensed. Clara's hand found hers, squeezing once. Adrian's expression didn't change. My wife is the Duchess of Blackthorne. She's also the reason this estate survived when my father nearly destroyed it. She uncovered theft, renegotiated contracts, and managed finances with a precision that most trained accountants can't match. She's also the primary beneficiary of your title, Ashford said. One could argue she manipulated you into marriage to gain access to the estate. One could argue that. Adrian's voice was sharp. One would also be spectacularly wrong. How do you know? Because I proposed to her, not the other way around. I offered her a practical arrangement because I trusted her competence and her honesty. Adrian paused. The fact that I fell in love with her later is irrelevant to her qualifications. The chamber went silent. Ashford recovered first. Love is hardly a defense against accusations of impropriety. No. But results are. Adrian gestured to the documents. The estate is profitable, the tenants are paid, the land is productive. Every debt my father incurred has been settled, every contract renegotiated fairly, and through it all my wife has kept records that would stand up to any auditor in England. Except Hale's, Ashford said. Hale was a fraud. His documents were forged. We proved it publicly, which is why he fled. Adrian's eyes were cold. But you already knew that, didn't you, Lord Ashford? Ashford went very still. Because Hale didn't manufacture his accusations alone, Adrian continued. He had help. Someone in Parliament who wanted the Blackthorne estate vulnerable. Someone who's been trying to acquire our land for years. You're making serious accusations. I'm stating facts. Adrian pulled a paper from his coat. This is a letter from Hale to an unnamed parliamentary member dated 2 months ago. It was recovered from his rooms after he fled. It details his agreement to provide falsified evidence in exchange for a share of the estate once it was seized and sold. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Where did you get that? Ashford demanded. Ashford Jimman. From someone who knew where to look. Adrian glanced at the gallery, at Constance, who sat with a small, satisfied smile. Clara understood then. Constance had been doing her own digging, building her own case. The letter doesn't name you specifically, Lord Ashford, Adrian said, but it does mention a parliamentary ally with land interests adjacent to Blackthorne. I'll let this chamber draw its own conclusions. Ashford's face went purple. This is slander. This is evidence. Lord Whitmore stood, taking the letter from Adrian. He read it, his expression darkening. Then he looked at Ashford. I believe we need to discuss this inquiry in private session. There's nothing to discuss. There's quite a lot to discuss. Lady Hastings stood as well, including why this hearing was called in the first place and who benefited from the timing. Other members began to stand. Voices rose. Lord Ashford looked around the chamber, at the turning tide, at the allies who were suddenly avoiding his eyes, and Clara saw the moment he realized he'd lost. The inquiry is tabled, Whitmore announced, pending further investigation into the allegations against Lord Ashford. Adrian bowed once. Thank you, my lord. He turned and walked out of the chamber. Clara and Margaret met him in the hallway. Margaret threw her arms around him without hesitation. You destroyed him, she said, half laughing, half crying. We destroyed him, Adrian corrected. He looked at Clara. Together. Clara stepped forward and kissed him. Right there in the parliamentary hallway, in front of reporters and lords and anyone watching. When they pulled apart, Adrian was smiling. Let's go home, he said. The journey back to the estate felt different than the one to London. Lighter. Like they'd been carrying weights they could finally set down. Margaret fell asleep in the carriage, her head on Clara's shoulder. Clara stroked her hair absently while watching the countryside roll past. What are you thinking? Adrian asked. That we won, Clara said. Actually won, not just survived. Won. Does it feel like you thought it would? Clara considered. No, it feels better. Why? Because it's real. We didn't just defend ourselves. We proved that what we built matters, that the choices we made were right. She looked at him. That's more than victory. That's validation. Adrian reached across the carriage and took her hand. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. It just would have been harder and less organized. He laughed. Probably. Definitely. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Adrian spoke again. I want to do something. For the estate. For the tenants. What? Set up a fund. For education. For the children. Adrian's voice was thoughtful. My father destroyed so much because he was ignorant, not of facts, but of consequences. He never learned to think beyond his own wants. And you want to make sure the next generation does. Yes. I want kids from tenant families to have the same opportunities as Lord's children. I want them to learn mathematics and literature and critical thinking. He paused. I want them to have choices. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. That's a good idea. You think so? I think it's brilliant, and I think I know exactly how to structure it. Adrian smiled. Of course you do. By the time they reached the estate, Clara had the entire plan sketched out in her mind. Scholarship amounts. Eligibility requirements. A board of trustees that would include tenant representatives. It would cost money. But the estate could afford it now. They could afford to build something lasting. The staff greeted them at the door. Mrs. Brennan, the maids, the groundskeepers, all of them crowding into the entrance hall with barely contained excitement. "We heard," Mrs. Brennan said, "about Parliament, about Lord Ashford." "News travels fast," Adrian said. "We have connections." Mrs. Brennan allowed herself a small smile. "Welcome home, Your Grace. Both of you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." That night they held a dinner for the household staff and the senior tenants. Nothing formal, just food and conversation, and the kind of celebration that came from shared relief. John Whitfield raised his glass. "To the Duke and Duchess, for fighting when they could have run, for standing when they could have bent, and for remembering," another tenant added, "that the estate isn't just land and titles, it's people." They drank. They ate. They laughed. And Clara looked around the table, at Margaret, who was arguing good-naturedly with one of the tenant's sons about crop rotations. At Adrian, who was actually smiling while listening to Mrs. Brennan's gossip about the London trip. At Constance, who'd arrived unannounced again and was holding court at the far end of the table, and realized something. This was family. Not the kind you were born into, the kind you built, the kind you fought for, the kind that lasted. Later, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Clara and Adrian stood in the estate's library. The same room where, months ago, Clara had first realized she might be falling in love with the cold Duke who'd proposed a marriage of convenience. "I have something for you," Adrian said. He handed her a folded document. Clara opened it, read it twice to make sure she understood. It was a deed, to half the estate. "Adrian, I can't." "You can. You should." He stepped closer. "When I married you, I told you it was a partnership. But legally, everything still belongs to me. The estate, the title, all of it. That's how the law works. I don't care about the law. I care about what's right." Adrian's voice was firm. "You rebuilt this place as much as I did. You saved it. You fought for it. You deserve to own it. The title can't transfer. The title is mine. The land can be ours." Adrian caught her hands. "I'm not asking you to take this out of obligation or strategy. I'm offering it because it's true. This estate belongs to both of us. And when I die, I want you to have full control, not as my widow, as my partner." Clara's vision blurred. "You're going to make me cry." "Good, you never cry. It's unsettling." She laughed through the tears. "I love you." "I know." "No, I need you to understand." Clara set the deed aside and cupped his face in her hands. "I didn't think I could have this. A real marriage, a real partnership, someone who saw me as more than just useful." "You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met," Adrian said, "and I see all of it, the brilliance, the stubbornness, the way you terrify auditors and charm tenants and somehow manage to keep me from making an ass of myself. You still make an ass of yourself. Less often, though. Marginally." They kissed, slow and deep and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now?" Clara smiled. "Now we live. We build that education fund. We scandalize London a few more times. We raise Margaret to be even more terrifying than I am. That's a high bar." "She'll manage," Adrian laughed. Then he grew serious. "I want children. With you. If you want them." Clara's breath caught. "You never mentioned that before." "Because I didn't think I deserved them. Didn't think I'd be a good father." Paused. "But watching you with Margaret, watching you build something real out of broken pieces, I think maybe I could learn." "You'd be a good father," Clara said softly. "You're already learning how to let people in. That's the hard part." "And you? Do you want children?" Clara thought about it, about tiny humans who'd inherit Adrian's gray eyes and her stubbornness, about teaching them numbers and letting them run wild through the estate, about building something that would outlast both of them. "Yes," she said. "I do." Adrian kissed her again, deeper this time, with the kind of intent that made Clara's pulse quicken. "We should go upstairs," he said against her mouth. "We should." Neither of them moved. Then Clara laughed and pulled him toward the door. "Come on, before Constance appears and lectures us about propriety." "She's staying in the East Wing. We're safe. You don't know your grandmother very well if you think distance stops her. They made it to Clara's rooms, their rooms now, really, since Adrian spent most nights there anyway, and closed the door on the rest of the world. And for the first time in either of their lives, they didn't think about contracts or strategy or what came next. They just lived. 6 months later, Clara stood in the estate's new schoolhouse, watching 20 children from tenant families bend over their slates, working through arithmetic problems she'd designed. Margaret was at the front of the room, helping a younger girl with fractions. She'd discovered she liked teaching, had a knack for it. Clara had suggested she might formalize it, study pedagogy, maybe even open a second school for girls specifically. Margaret had looked at her like she'd offered her the world. "You think I could do that?" she'd asked. "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," Clara had replied. "You're a Blackthorne. We don't back down from challenges." Now, watching Margaret patiently explain why you couldn't add fractions with different denominators, Clara felt a fierce pride. They'd done this, built this, made something real out of the wreckage they'd inherited. Adrian appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "How's it going?" "3 of them are already ahead of where I was at their age," Clara said. "It's terrifying." "You love it." "I do." Adrian crossed the room and slipped his hand into hers. "I have news. Good or bad? Depends on your perspective." He smiled. "Constance wants to host a ball at the estate to formally introduce Margaret to society as a Blackthorne." Clara groaned. "That's a terrible idea." "I told her the same thing." "What did she say?" "That we've already scandalized London twice. Once more won't hurt, and it'll cement Margaret's position." Clara looked at Margaret, who was laughing at something one of the students had said. The girl who'd arrived 9 months ago, hunched and terrified, was gone. In her place was a young woman who stood straight and spoke clearly and belonged. "Fine," Clara said. "We'll do the ball." "You're sure?" "No, but I trust Constance's instincts." Clara squeezed his hand. "Besides, what's one more fight?" "That's my wife." They stood together in the schoolhouse, watching the future they were building take shape in the form of children who'd never have to choose between survival and education. That night, after the students had left and Margaret had returned to the main house for dinner, Clara and Adrian walked through the estate grounds. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The fields stretched out around them, green and productive. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "The marriage, the partnership, all of it." Adrian looked at her like she'd asked if he regretted breathing. "No, never." "Not even when it was hard?" "Especially when it was hard." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "You know what I regret?" "What?" "That I didn't ask you to marry me sooner, that I wasted months being afraid when I could have been loving you." Clara felt her throat tighten. "That's sentimental." "I know. I didn't think you did sentimental." "I didn't. You changed that." Adrian cupped her face in his hands. "You changed everything." Clara kissed him. Right there in the fields, with the sunset blazing around them and the estate sprawling at their backs. When they pulled apart, Clara rested her hand on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet, wasn't quite sure herself. But she thought, maybe... "Adrian," she said. "Yes?" "I think we should talk about nurseries." He blinked. "Nurseries. And names, and whether we're raising our children to be ruthlessly practical or hopelessly romantic." Adrian's eyes widened. "Clara, are you? I don't know yet, but maybe." She smiled. "Probably." For a moment, Adrian just stared at her. Then he picked her up and spun her around, laughing in a way she'd never heard before. "Put me down," Clara said, laughing too. "You'll hurt yourself." "I don't care." "I do. I need you functional." He set her down but didn't let go. "A baby. Possibly a baby." "Our baby." "Yes, Adrian, that's generally how it works." He kissed her again, fierce and joyful, and full of something that looked a lot like hope. The ball was everything Clara expected, and worse. London society descended on the estate in waves. Carriages clogged the drive. Servants rushed to accommodate demands. The ballroom blazed with candles and scrutiny. But this time, Clara wasn't afraid. She stood at the top of the stairs in a gown of deep blue silk, Adrian's favorite color on her, he'd said, with her husband on one side and Margaret on the other. "Ready?" Adrian asked. No, Margaret said, but I'm doing it anyway. That's the spirit, Clara said. They descended together. The room didn't go silent. It never did anymore. People had learned that the Blackthorns didn't break under pressure. But heads turned, voices dropped. Lady Pemberton approached first. Your Grace, Miss Blackthorne, what a lovely event! Thank you, Lady Pemberton, Clara said. And congratulations are in order, I hear. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The pregnancy was barely confirmed. How did she— On the school, Lady Pemberton clarified. My daughters tell me it's quite progressive. It's necessary, Clara said. Yes. Well, progress often is. Lady Pemberton smiled. It almost looked genuine. I hope you'll consider accepting female students from London families as well, for a fee, of course. Clara blinked. Then she understood. Lady Pemberton was proposing a partnership, a way to fund the school while also giving it legitimacy in society's eyes. We can discuss it, Clara said carefully. Excellent. I'll have my secretary contact you. Lady Pemberton swept away. Margaret stared after her. Did that just happen? I think we just became respectable, Clara said. Is that good? I have no idea. Adrian laughed. Come on, we should dance before someone else tries to make us legitimate. They moved on to the floor. Adrian led with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. Margaret was claimed immediately by one of Constance's pre-approved young men, a second son with a decent income and no scandal attached to his name. Clara watched them dance and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth fighting for. The ball lasted until dawn. When the last guests finally left, Clara kicked off her shoes in the entrance hall and sank onto the stairs. Adrian sat beside her. Tired? Exhausted. Was it worth it? Clara thought about Lady Pemberton's offer, about the young men who'd asked Margaret to dance without hesitation, about the way London society had looked at them, not with scandal, but with something approaching respect. Yes, she said, it was worth it. Margaret appeared from the ballroom, face flushed. I'm never doing that again. You will, Constance said, following behind her. And next time, you'll enjoy it. I doubt that. You'll see. Constance looked at Clara and Adrian. You did well tonight, both of you. High praise from the formidable Lady Constance, Adrian said. Don't let it go to your head. But Constance smiled. Now, when are you going to tell me about the baby? Clara's jaw dropped. How did you— You've been touching your stomach all evening, and you refused wine. Constance's eyes gleamed. I'm old, not blind. Adrian laughed. Nothing gets past you. No, it doesn't. Constance's expression softened. Congratulations, truly. She left them there on the stairs, three people who'd become a family through choice rather than blood. Margaret sat on Clara's other side. A baby? Possibly a baby, Clara corrected. Definitely a baby, Adrian said. Margaret grinned. I'm going to be an aunt. You are? I don't know how to be an aunt. Neither do we know how to be parents, Clara said. We'll figure it out together. Margaret leaned against Clara's shoulder. I like that plan. They sat together as the sun rose over the estate, painting the world in shades of gold. And Clara thought about the girl she'd been 18 months ago. Invisible. Careful. Convinced that safety meant never being seen. She'd been wrong. Safety wasn't invisibility. It was knowing that when the world pushed back, you had people who'd stand beside you. It was building something worth defending. It was love that chose to be brave instead of careful. Adrian's hand found hers. She squeezed it. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm glad I learned to dance. He smiled. So am I. 5 years later, Clara stood in the estate gardens, watching her daughter chase butterflies with the single-minded determination of a 3-year-old who refused to accept defeat. The girl had Adrian's gray eyes and Clara's stubborn chin. Her name was Eleanor, and she was utterly fearless. She's going to hurt herself, Adrian said from beside Clara. Probably. Shouldn't we stop her? No, she needs to learn consequences. You're a terrible mother. And yet our daughter adores me. Adrian smiled. She does. Eleanor tripped, landed hard on her hands and knees, and immediately scrambled back up. She glared at the offending rock like it had personally wronged her, then resumed her butterfly hunt. "She's definitely yours," Adrian said. "She's ours," Clara corrected. Margaret appeared from the schoolhouse, followed by a group of students. She was 24 now, running the education program with the kind of fierce competence that made Clara proud. She'd also gotten engaged last month to a scholar from Cambridge who looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. "Aunt Margaret!" Eleanor shrieked, abandoning the butterflies to run full tilt at her aunt. Margaret caught her, swinging her up. "Hello, Terror! What are you destroying today?" "Butterflies, but they're too fast." "Have you tried being faster?" Eleanor's eyes went wide. "I can do that?" "You can do anything if you're clever about it." Clara shook her head. "You're teaching her terrible things." "I'm teaching her to think strategically," Margaret corrected. "Like you taught me." She set Eleanor down. The girl immediately resumed her hunt, this time with more focused intensity. "The new term starts next week," Margaret said. "We have 40 students enrolled, including 10 from London." "Lady Pemberton's doing?" Clara asked. "And others, word spreading." Margaret's expression was proud. "We're making a difference." "You're making a difference," Clara said. "This was your vision as much as mine." "It was ours." Margaret smiled. "That's what we do, build things together." She returned to her students. Clara watched her go. This girl who'd arrived broken and become whole through sheer determination and the safety of being wanted. Adrian slipped his arm around Clara's waist. "Happy?" "Terrifyingly so." "Good." Eleanor ran past them, still chasing butterflies, still refusing to quit. And Clara thought about the cold Duke who'd proposed a marriage of strategy and the invisible woman who'd accepted because she thought it was the safest option available. They'd both been wrong about what they needed. They'd both been right about what they'd found. "I love you," Clara said. "I know," Adrian said. "No, I need you to hear it." Clara turned to face him fully. "You gave me a life I didn't know I could have. A family. A purpose. A place where I don't have to be invisible to survive. You gave me the same thing." Adrian's voice was rough. "You taught me that feeling something doesn't make you weak, that trusting someone doesn't mean they'll destroy you, that love, real love, is work and choice and staying even when it's hard." "We're both terribly sentimental now," Clara said. "Yes. It's embarrassing." "Completely." They kissed while their daughter shrieked with triumph somewhere behind them, having finally caught her butterfly. That night, after Eleanor was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Adrian sat in the library, their library now, full of books they'd chosen together and memories they'd built. "I was thinking," Adrian said, "dangerous. We should write it down, what we've learned, what we've built." He gestured to the estate visible through the window. "Not for us, for Eleanor, for whoever comes after." "You want to write a manual for running an estate?" "I want to write the truth. That legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to build. That family isn't blood. It's commitment." He paused. "That the best things in life come from taking risks on people who scare you a little." Clara smiled. "I scared you?" "Terrified me. You still do sometimes." "Good." She curled against him, his arm around her shoulders, and thought about how to capture in words what they'd learned. That cold arrangements could become burning love. That mistakes could be repaired. That choosing trust over fear was the hardest and most important decision you could make. That sometimes the best partnerships started with a contract and ended with something words couldn't quite hold. "I'll help you write it," Clara said, but only if we're honest. No sanitizing, no pretending it was easy." "Deal." They sat in comfortable silence, planning their legacy, while outside the window the Blackthorne estate sprawled under starlight. 600 acres of productive land, 72 people working and living and thriving, and a school that was teaching the next generation that their circumstances didn't have to define their futures. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough.